couple of weeks ago, Zaz invited a handful of ESO content creators to attend a playtesting event in San Francisco for the upcoming Elder Scrolls Online chapter, NECROM. Surprisingly, this basement YouTuber was invited to the party, and now that the embargo has lifted, I can finally talk about it. The playtesting event consisted of a brief presentation that provided some interesting insights and relevant pieces of information that pertain to the new Arcanist class as well as the new zones. After the presentation, all of the attendees were granted 1 hour to log in and play an early build of the upcoming content. Now, we're all gamers here, right? So you all surely must understand that 1 hour of gaming is really not a lot of time, so we made the most of it by trying to experience as much content as we could to be able to report back to you all with our findings and first impressions. You're probably seeing a lot of videos like this one popping up on your feed, so allow me to share what you can expect from this particular video. First, I'd like to discuss some of the information that was relayed to us during the initial presentation, with the occasional interjection to reference what I observed in the game. I'd then like to talk about the game design philosophy that were apparent through my time spent playtesting NECROM and from listening in on the developers' discussions that really left an impression on me. Afterwards, I'd like to talk to you a bit about the Arcanist class itself with a focus on its healing and support capabilities, seeing as I enjoy playing a support role in ESO's PvP scene, so naturally I found that aspect of the class the most intriguing. And to finish things off, I wanted to share my own personal take on everything. Alright, without further ado, let's get into it. Jeremy Serra, ESO's lead content designer, kicked things off by giving us a brief overview of what we could expect from this upcoming chapter. He threw up some images on his screen of some of the different zones that we'd be able to visit. We'll be returning to the Telvanni Peninsula in this chapter, and we were informed that this peninsula makes up roughly 40% of the new playable content. The other 60% will consist of 2 other zones, Apocrypha, which is Hermaeus Mora's Daedric Realm of Oblivion, and a completely new location that has never been seen before. Sarah asserted that when revisiting older zones from previous Elder Scrolls games, the ESO developers always aim to stay true to the original locations, while also simultaneously adding their own unique spin to things. You can see this design philosophy in action through the implementation of a welcoming town located in Apocrypha, and the development of an entirely new zone. When I was able to playtest NECROM, I only stayed in the Telvanni Peninsula area, and I actually ran into a world event. The world event begins by running into one of these floating fellas. Fighting it completely by myself with a class and spec that I hadn't the slightest clue what I was doing proved to be quite the challenge. The developers saw me and Ninja614 struggling with these encounters and informed us that they were the new world events, and that they were designed to be able to be completed with a small group of people. If I recall correctly, the devs stated that at a certain point in the fight, an instance portal would appear that the group would be able to port into to access the rest of the world event. This sounds a bit like how we can enter an Oblivion portal in Blackwood or the Deadlands, and the developers acknowledged this, stating that sometimes you could enter one of those things and because other people had entered before you, they could have already cleared out the entire fight. We were informed that in this case, these world events would not operate in this manner. We were also shown images of the 2 new companions. One will be an Arcanist and the other a Warden. The concept for the new trial was also hinted at. The trial itself will be called Sanity's Edge, and supposedly it takes place inside the mind of an individual, and we, the players, are meant to enter this character's mind to defeat the monsters that torment them, which is a pretty neat nod to Lovecraftian horror tropes if you ask me. While we're on that topic, a lot of the new enemies are very uncanny and unsettling, which absolutely contributes to the eldritch horror vibe that the devs suggested would be integral to this year's theme. Brian Wheeler, ESO's lead combat developer, chimed in to talk about the new class that will debut with the NECROM chapter, the Arcanist. He informed us that the team had been working on the class since 2021, and that it would play in a significantly different manner than the other classes. More on this later. He informed us that the notion of dividing up skill lines so that they corresponded with the holy trinity of roles, tanking, healing, and damage dealing, was one that resonated with a lot of people. Thus, they applied this principle to the Arcanist class. However, they did not divide up the visuals and lore of each skill line, unlike classes like the Warden, whose skill lines consist of different themes. I'd also like to add that the visual and sound design for the class is excellent and very unique. I describe the sounds of the Arcanist skills as thick and chunky. As someone that spams plenty of bass-boosted sound effects in her videos, I could definitely get behind those deep, otherworldly noises. The visuals for the class were also very flashy, and the skills were very satisfying to cast. Wheeler also introduced us to a mechanic that is completely unique to the Arcanist class, the generation and spending of crux. Some skills generate crux and others spend crux in order to augment abilities, such as lowering their costs or providing additional bonuses. Wheeler assured us that this mechanic is designed in such a way that it will not prohibit gameplay for those that aren't super interested in applying this mechanic to their playstyle. We were also informed that the Arcanist skill lines were designed to have a minimum amount of synergies and not a lot of unique buffs. The developers wanted to create the class in such a manner that players would want to slot only Arcanist skills on their skill bars, and that this would be a viable build strategy. On that note, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the design philosophies that were apparent in this presentation and through my time spent actually playtesting the new content. The developers insisted that one of the acceptance criteria for the Arcanist class was that it, quote-unquote, has to play different. This phrase, has to play different, is one that I think perfectly encapsulates my impression of NECROM, beyond just the Arcanist class itself. Let's take a look at some examples of this. The Arcanist does indeed play differently from the other classes. The button cadence is quite different, for example. The execute had a 0.3 second cast time, meaning you couldn't quite animation cancel it the way you can many other skills. I had to constantly remind myself to slow down a bit anytime I used it, because I was often inadvertently completely canceling it by attempting to bash weave or block cancel it. There were also a couple of channeled skills in its toolkit that had cast times that were slightly over 4 seconds long, which may not sound like a particularly long duration of time, but it really feels like a lot when you play, especially if you're used to playing with high APM. These skills with lengthy cast times cannot be cancelled mid-channel by light attacking or hitting another skill. They had to be hard cancelled with a block or a bar swap or a roll dodge. The Arcanist also has a crux generating and spending mechanic, where certain skills build crux and other skills can be augmented by consuming crux. This leads to what the devs refer to as a quote-unquote 1-2-3 punch combo, where certain skills were to, ideally, be used in succession to one another to be able to generate crux and then subsequently spend crux, so as to be able to have a more powerful skill. A lot of the Arcanist skills were actually fairly unique and different from anything that we've seen in the game. The teleport skill, which some players have suggested looks a lot like the sorcerer's streak skill, actually has a cooldown to it, so it can't be spammed the way Sorc spams streak in Cyrodiil. It is also possible to go back through the portal once you've already entered it, making it more of a kind of juking skill. One morph of this skill also allows allies to synergize with the portal to pass through it as well, which sounds awesome for those that enjoy traversing the overland with a partner or hitting up open world PvP with some homies. I thought that the support skill line's ultimate was also really unique, as casting it summons a glyphic that can either be healed or attacked by allies, depending on the morph, in exchange for an amount of healing and damage buffing that corresponds with how much damage or healing the glyphic receives. In other words, the more the summoned glyphic gets healed or the more it gets damaged, the more heals and weapon and spell damage you'll receive from it. We've never seen a kind of interactable totem skill before, and it sounds pretty neat, honestly. A lot of the Arcanist morphs of skills were also not distinguished by whether they were magicka-based morphs or stamina-based morphs. In fact, we were informed that a handful of the Arcanist skills would either cost magicka or stamina, depending on which stat pool is larger on your character, which should allow for more freedom when coming up with builds. You know how some skills, when slotted on your bar, grant you a passive buff so long as you remain on that bar, even when you haven't cast anything? Well, something else that was different with the Arcanist class was that it had skills that provided buffs when slotted, but these buffs carried over even when you swapped bars and no longer had that skill on your active skill bar. This is a completely new notion, and when asked if older skills would retroactively receive this treatment, where the buffs that they provide would be able to be active on both bars, the devs suggested that it could be a possibility, and that they'd wait to see how players react to this new addition before building on it. I found that a lot of the sets and mythics that I saw also adhere to this whole has to play different mantra. For example, there was a mythic that completely destroys your light and heavy attack damage in return for some significant boost to your overall damage and recovery. You could see how this kind of mythic would be perfect for players that hate light attack weaving and just want to cast their skills. There was an overland set that would give you a shitload of damage if you stayed on one bar for a specific amount of time and then bar swapped, which could be nice for players that struggle with the bar swapping mechanic and likewise don't bar swap very often. Or perhaps it would be ideal for those that like having defensive bars that allow them to turtle up for a hot minute before they swap bars for an offensive attack. There was a set that I believe came from the new trial that would give you a significant amount of damage if you remained still, or a significant amount of recovery if you were moving around, which could be nice for players that struggle to move while casting skills. I also wonder how viable something like that might be for content where you can just stack and burn without having to move. The developers made it clear in their little design philosophy talks that they want to make sure that they created stuff that could appease everyone and all of the different playstyles. Something that Skyrim grandma can use and enjoy, and something that appeases the sweaty tryhards that honestly need to touch grass and take a shower. Upon recalling the recent Oakensoul mythic that promotes one-bar gameplay, and then considering all of these new additions that reinforce a handful of other unique playstyles, I can really see how the devs are making an effort to promote a bunch of different ways to play the game. The Arcanist class has a really interesting set of support skills. As I mentioned previously, the ultimate consists of a summoned glyphic that must either be healed or damaged by allied players to receive benefits from it, such as heals and spell and weapon damage. The crux generating skill from the skill line propels healing runes either at yourself or an ally. The runes heal for an initial amount, and then they can either grant minor heroism to a target if they're healed under 50% of their health, or they can provide an additional heal over time depending on the morph. The crux consuming skill comes in the form of a channeled beam that can be cast for up to 4.5 seconds. And it heals everyone in its area of effect. Crux can be consumed to restore some magicka and stamina to your allies. There's also a damage shield skill that can be cast on yourself or up to 3 allies in front of you. Depending on the morph that's chosen, the player can decide if they want this skill to be a crux generating or crux consuming skill. If the crux consumption morph is chosen, crux can be spent to reduce the cost of the skill. The crux generating morph grants an additional effect, where recasting a skill on a target improves the strength of the shield. Something that really stood out to me when I checked out this particular skill was that it had a little blurb about how the shields would prefer the reticle target or targets that had low health and no shields. If you play support in PvP, you're probably familiar with the fact that the targeting of heals can be really whack. I could be staring right at a teammate of mine that is in deep execute and about to get clapped on by some other player on a flag in the Imperial City, but when I cast my Breath of Life burst heal to try to save them, it'll go to the f***ing guard NPC that was already at full health, or some random gamer that I wasn't even looking at that didn't need any heals anyways. This clause about prioritizing targeted players or players in need of protection is excellent, and something that I wish could be implemented for many other heals and support skills. The Arcanist also has an area of effect skill that provides those that stand in it a handful of buffs. These buffs increase spell and weapon damage and health, mag, and stam recovery. The morphs either allow these buffs to cling onto you and your allies for an extended period of time once you've all left the AoE, or they provide an additional heal over time. And lastly, there's the Portal TM lookin' ass skill that has everyone on the edge of their seats since its initial reveal in January. This is a groundcast skill that allows you to quickly teleport from where you were just standing to the other apocryphal gate that you place. Depending on the morph that you select, you can either allow allies to synergize with your portal and make use of its teleportation capabilities, or increase your movement speed after you've teleported. As I mentioned before, this skill does have a cooldown, so apologies to those that were looking to use this skill to be an absolute menace in PvP, for it cannot be spammed. I didn't really get a chance to explore the new zones and repeatable content such as the world bosses, public dungeons, and anything else that could yield nice rewards and collectibles to the extent that I would have liked given the time constraints of the playtesting event. Thus, I will reserve my judgment on these matters for a later date, once I get a chance to log into the PTS and engage with this new content some more. I will say that the content that we were shown via the initial presentation looked very intriguing. The monsters were creepy and eerie, the zones were very elaborately designed, and the characters had some pretty nice drip. Needless to say, I am very eager to get to experience more of this new content on the PTS soon, but I can share my initial impressions of the new class. As I stated previously, I really enjoy the visual and audio design for this class. As someone that mains a Nightblade, a class that really doesn't have a lot going for it in terms of visuals, I found the Arcanist skills to be really satisfying to cast, and they all looked really visually impressive. I personally enjoy fast-paced gameplay, and I found that there were a handful of skills in the Arcanist toolkit that supported this kind of playstyle. It was a blast being able to zip around in a delve with the portal skill morph that granted expedition and nuke tons of ads with the flashy ground AoEs, and the class is spammable that was smooth and easy to weave. On the other hand, I found that I didn't naturally gravitate towards the 1-2-3 punch combo for generating and consuming crux that the devs spoke of because I wasn't super fond of the Arcanist channeled healing and damaging beam skills that took over 4 seconds to cast. Moreover, as I mentioned before, I kept unintentionally canceling the execute because of the 0.3 second cast time that it has. Because I am a high APM Andy, I found that integrating these slower pace skills into my DPS rotation as I traversed the overland made the gameplay feel a little clunky and awkward at times. Granted, I'm certain I wasn't playing in an optimized manner given the time constraints, and I'm sure you could argue that these skills will just take some time to get used to for some of us. I do think that the Arcanist support kit sounds really promising for small-scale PvP scenarios, what with its portal skill that can be used by allies, the minor buffs that it can provide the group, the shields that applies to up to 3 allies, the healing beam that can be used effectively in a tightly stacked group, among other things. I might just make an Arcanist character to use in Battlegrounds, and that's saying a lot as someone that only plays 2 characters. What we got to see at the playtesting event was still an early build of NECROM, so some aspects of it are subject to change. I highly encourage you all to download the public test server when the new chapter gets added on the 17th of April. If you can, check out the new class and content for yourselves and share your feedback with the developers via the ESO forums. I know I'll definitely be hopping on the PTS myself to be able to experience all of the other parts of NECROM that I didn't get a chance to check out during the playtesting event, so you can definitely expect a PTS First Impressions video from me that focuses more on the new content, rewards, and collectibles in the near future. But that's all for now. What do you guys think? I know I just dumped a whole bunch of information on you all, but I'd like to hear your first impressions of this new content in the comments. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Zos once again for providing me with the opportunity of playtesting NECROM to be able to share my findings with you all today. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you to my YouTube members for going the extra mile and supporting my content creation endeavors. I'll see you gamers in the next video. Cheers!